So I want to welcome everybody today. We have an incredible group of educators, and I feel so lucky that they agreed to take part in this. The topic for today is supporting and nurturing young readers and writers. And when I say young, I'm thinking actually 4 to 7, 4 to 7 year olds. What happens when they're 4 and they're 7? Aeriale Johnson teaches third graders for Liberation at Washington Elementary School, a place bursting with the energy of multiculturalism and multilingualism in downtown San Jose, California. She is a national board certified teacher specializing in early middle childhood literacy, and a recipient of many grants and fellowships. She is also an associate director of the San Jose Area Writing Project, facilitating professional development for teachers and writing workshops for children. Her blogs, articles, and essays have been published by NCTE, Heinemann, School Library Journal, the Association for Supervision and Curriculum Development, the International Literacy Association, and Scholastic. Wow, for something. Kathy Collins is co-author with Matt Glover of the Heinemann title, I Am Reading. Kathy is the beloved author of Growing Readers as well as Reading for Real. She presents at conferences and works in schools all over the world to support teachers in developing high-quality, effective literacy instruction in the elementary school grades. Kathy has worked closely with the Teachers College Reading and Writing Project at Columbia University, and she was a first grade teacher in Brooklyn, New York. Actually, we taught together at PS 321 in Brooklyn. Vicki Vinton is a literacy consultant and writer who has worked in schools and districts across the country and around the world. She is the author of Dynamic Teaching for Deeper Reading, Shifting to a Problem-Based Approach, 2017, and co-author of What Readers Really Do, Teaching the Process of Meaning Making and the Power of Grammar, Unconventional Approaches to the Conventions of Language. Vicki is also author of the novel, The Jungle Law. Additionally, you can find Vicki online at the popular literacy blog, To Make a Prairie, which I highly recommend. Matt Glover has been a teacher, principal, and consultant for over 30 years. He is the author and co-author of many Heinemann titles, including I Am Reading, Engaging Young Writers, Projecting Possibilities for Writers, Already Ready, and Watch Katie and Matt, Sit Down and Teach Up, a video-enhanced ebook. Matt was also co-editor with Ellen Oliver Keene, of a best-selling collection of essays, The Teacher You Want to Be. An international literacy consultant, Matt frequently speaks on topics related to nurturing writers of all ages, early reading, and supporting children's intellectual development. And I want to say that actually all of us have had the opportunity to visit the schools in Reggio Emilia, which is kind of interesting that we've all been there, right? I wanted to start by reading two little excerpts, and then maybe using this as a jump off for just everybody just jumping in and saying what they had to say about it. I think there's a tremendous anxiety right now that both parents and teachers have about children just falling behind, and I think that's something we really need to talk about a little bit. So the first one is from a 2013 study of the results of both early and later reading instruction, early being 5-year-olds, later being 7-year-olds, reading instruction conducted by a University of Cambridge research team that advised that formal schooling should be delayed until children are at least 7, and that pushing it earlier is damaging children's academic achievement, especially when it comes to reading. They studied groups of children who received formal reading instruction at age 5 and children who started formal instruction at age 7. They concluded that by the age of 11, there was no difference in reading ability level between the two groups. But the children who started at 5 tended to develop less positive attitudes to reading and showed poorer text comprehension than those children who had started later. And the part that I didn't put down here is that they were saying that what they felt was that 5-year-olds need more of a play-based education at that point. So that's the first part. The second was a New York Times article that I read in June, and it really kind of stayed with me. Danielle Gandy has spent countless difficult hours guiding her energetic 6-year-old Cadnice through online meetings and assignments provided by her charter school. Still, Miss Gadney is under no illusion that Cadnice has completed the normal kindergarten curriculum and is especially concerned about her progress in math. Looking at the work the teacher has done, I applaud her, Miss Gadney said, but it's maybe a fraction of what they would be learning if they were in an actual school setting. If they are transitioning into first grade, will there be time to catch up and get them up to par? And that really stuck with me because I spent so many years being a kindergarten teacher that this whole feeling of, will my kindergarten child be behind in math and reading and writing, gives me pause for thought. And I'm wondering what any of you have to say about that and about what you would be advising teachers and parents of children in those ages. Any thoughts? Matt, what about you?
Sure. I think the thing we have to, both parents and teachers always have to keep in mind is that our job as educators always is to meet children wherever they are, right, and to help them move forward. That as a first grade teacher for many years, as a principal of a school with 1,000 kindergartners and on, we weren't expecting children to come into kindergarten or first grade or any grade with a certain set of skills that everybody would have, right? I have twin daughters. They were vastly different learners going into kindergarten or into first grade. That's two, much less 25, 30 students in a class. And so I think we always have to keep in mind that our job is wherever children are. I don't have any expectations of where students need to be, that my job as an educator would be to meet children where they are and help them move forward. And I think it's important for parents to not only realize that, but to expect that from teachers, that wherever their child is coming into school, it's not that if they don't have certain skills or not a certain spot, then, well, too bad you missed out, or that we're trying to catch up. You can't speed things up in that way. There are things we certainly can do instructionally that are more or less effective. But in terms of making up ground or that kind of thing, it's simply where are you at the beginning of the year? And let's start from there and start to build nudge by nudge by nudge across that year as effectively as we can. But it's not a matter of trying to catch up to a certain spot.
Kathy, you look very pensive. What are you thinking?
No, I'm thinking about this so much. There's a group of us who are talking a lot about the falling behind narrative. And this is really nothing new. It's an opportunistic narrative. You wonder who benefits from that narrative, that children are falling behind. Well, testing companies will benefit from that narrative, and standardized curricula will benefit from that narrative. And, cram schools and, for-profit entities will benefit from that narrative. And I mean, this is a genuine curiosity, but how is anyone falling behind when everybody's experiencing the same thing? I mean, of course, it's different and slightly different in different places, but every child's school has been disrupted to some degree. So we've never before had this kind of really universal, I don't know if trauma might be a strong word or not strong enough word for what's happening with children's schooling. And so just to, to jump on, add to what Matt said, we're all, year after year, you get kids where they are and you work from that spot. And these years will be no different. People will get kids where they are. Teachers will get kids where they are, and they'll move from that place. I don't know. The framing is really important, and I think it's really important for teachers to help parents understand that our kids really falling behind. There's other ways they might be surging. There's other opportunities in this that kids might be thriving. So I'll tag it over to somebody else.
Well, just to add on that real quick, Kathy, it's funny sometimes when I talk with teachers about the whole idea of nudging development, thinking about where children are and what's the next small step. At some point, often a teacher will say, "Oh, so you mean we should just meet them right where they are and then go from there to the next small step?" And the kind of little light bulb goes off. And I facetiously will say it, but there's a lot of truth that will say, right, and what's the alternative? I mean, what's the alternative to meeting children where they are and going to that next small step? Meeting them where they're not and going too fast? And you start to phrase it like that, it doesn't make any sense for children in terms of how we react to wherever children are. So I think we just have to keep that in mind.
Right. I mean, I
also
yes.
feel like I also feel like we're devaluing what's going on in children's homes, not just now, but always has been happening. Kids come to school with these deep funds of knowledge. And I think it's so unfortunate that at a time when we can value those funds of knowledge like we never have before, because we are seeing it in action every single day, everything that's going on behind children, what they're running to the screen with. My kids came running to the screen this morning with things that they did over the break or things that they got for holiday gifts, and all those sorts of things. And so, one of my students just moved to a new house. She took us on a tour to have her new home during the break or during a break at school. So I think that's part of it for me, is that, we don't need to devalue what kids are already bringing to the table. But not only that, but they can use both their experiences in their homes and also their experiences with this pandemic to the table as it becomes a learning tool, right? And kids are able, with the right guidance, to develop their own strategies, right? And they have a great opportunity to do that right now, to develop their own strategies for processing things and dealing with things. And if you put the right kind of text in front of kids, it becomes not just, a literacy experience, but it's a social emotional learning experience as well. And that's also part of meeting kids where they are, not just where they are in terms of skills, but where are they emotionally? And, we transact with text in very specific ways based on who we are and what that text is. And so if you're creating the opportunity for kids to interact with the text from the experiences that they've had, and then that changes everything. And so I think that's really important as well. And the other thing that I am learning, this is something that, we're all thinking about, the things that we're going to take with us to brick and mortar school when we return to it. And one of the things for me is that actually a lot of my kids' learning is accelerated because their parents are coming to class with them. They're seeing what I do with their children every day. And they're like, oh, I didn't understand what this thing was that they were bringing home before. But now that I've seen you in action, Miss J, I know what it is you're asking of them. I know what your expectations are. I know what they should be doing, and I know how to help them. And so that was kind of an aha moment for me as a teacher. I think, a lot of times, and, I have to say that this happens primarily in Black and brown communities and students, who have, the students are Black and brown, and maybe the teachers are, maybe they aren't, but this idea like, oh, these parents don't want to participate, these parents don't want to engage, these parents can't help their children, and all of that it's a lie. They're completely capable, and it's like, what are you doing to engage parents? What are you doing to change their narrative of school and what schooling is? Because I guarantee you, like, what they experience with their children while they're at school with me, and then what they personally experienced, some time ago. And, a lot of my parents are bilingual, and my students are bilingual. And so some of the language experiences that they had in school versus like the translanguaging and that sort of thing that's going on in my classroom. So I just think it's really important that we value children's experiences at home, and that we value their parents and what their parents bring to the table as well.
Yeah.
They should be at the center of what we're doing with their children. They're their first teachers.
Right. Terrific points. So Vicki, when you actually work with older children,
Yeah.
and I purposely thought of you participating in this because so much of, I think, not just parents' anxiety, but administrators that I've met, their anxiety is like, well, we have to get them ready for, when they're in 5th grade and when they're in 6th grade and, what they're going to be doing then. But I really, really respect the way you think of readers and writers. And I thought it would be interesting to get some feedback from you.
Yeah. Well, I do. I tend to, usually the lowest I go in is it's around 2nd grade, which is about 7. Every once in a rare while, I found myself in a classroom, with kids that are in 1st grade or even kindergarten. But that is unusual. Like, I guess I want to come at it from 2 ways, and one is my daughter's own experience as a young child being a reader, and how challenging it was for me as a mother to hear her be labeled as a struggling reader, when I knew that she loved stories. She could not get enough of stories. She wanted to hear them again and again. But what she didn't, so that there was this love of texts that came very, very early, but yet that was not what was valued, even back then in a very progressive school where she was. By the time she was in 5th grade, all those, whatever challenges that she had with reading just kind of evaporated, which I think speaks to that first piece you mentioned, Renee, about do kids need to know this and be able to do this in kindergarten, if first, even in 2nd grade, if it risks disenfranchising them as people who are capable of thinking, because I think that I'm reminded then again of another educator, Eleanor Duckworth, whose work I really like. I think she's another person who's been forgotten a bit. But she talks about how we overestimate children academically and we underestimate them intellectually. And I have to wonder about whether or not, as Kathy was talking about, in terms of this narrative, about who's benefiting from it, and seems to me it's the forces of standardization, but also embedded in that is we are a country that seems to value competition over almost anything. And I think the anxiety that's built up that seems to be just in the air around us is, are we all going to fall behind? Are we not going to be who we thought we were? And that's a terrible thing to do to children, to teachers, to just every human being, to have to think that that somehow if we can't compete and if we can't come out on top, we've somehow have we don't, I'm not even sure what the word is I'm looking for, but we're not recognized in some way. And that disenfranchises everyone, parents, children, teachers, the entire country. And I think I personally think that's part of it as well.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that brings up the point then too of what do we really value in reading and writing. right? And as
Yeah.
you think about, your daughter, and, I have the same, well, at least a related experience with one of my own children, or, one of my children, in terms of reading being very difficult.
Mhm.
But when they're talking about her being a struggling reader, are they talking about her ability to decode or her ability to understand and comprehend? And if you think,
Yeah.
when we think about it, we know that what's going to make someone a strong reader long term is their ability to comprehend, right? It's not that
Mhm.
decoding text isn't important, but it's not the most important thing long term. And so we have to really, I think about, what do we value? In the same thing in writing, right? Do we only value young children's ability to transcribe text, to get text down on the page, or do we really care about how they compose language? And children are rich language composers long before
Mhm.
they're able to get words that we can read down on the page. If they can compose language and write long before that. And so do we value that composition, not to the exclusion of transcription, but do we put it in its in an appropriate place in terms of what do we really value and what's most important in terms of reading and writing? So I just think we always have to keep that in mind as well.
Yeah, I would jump
Well,
in and go ahead,
I
finish.
was just I was saying, I think it's particularly important with young children, because I think
Yeah.
so often it's easy for parents and for teachers to get so caught up on letter sound knowledge, right, that we forget all these other things, and that it's that we have to keep both in mind. And I think for it, so often parents will think, well, what else is there for reading or for writing? Or you've got to start with letters and sounds. What else is there? And it's just not the starting point. Children do a lot in terms of reading and writing long before they have any letter sound knowledge. Sorry, Vicki, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, no. I was just thinking that I was actually thinking about Aeriale and some of the work that you've done with your kids, because of the opportunities that you give them. And actually, I would say that you and Kathy as well in I Am Reading, that these are kids who are readers, even if they may not totally be decoders, right? And I think that what keeps kids going, which for better or worse can sometimes be neglected, in that standardization of curriculum, that need to master particular skills that somebody has said is important, is that we kind of forget that we read to make meaning of our lives and of the world. And if we don't give kids opportunities to just offer whatever thoughts they might have, and kind of trust that over time, those thoughts are going to get more insightful and complex and interesting, then once again, we've just done them a total disservice.
Vicki, I was thinking when you talked about your daughter and about how the school wanted to label her a struggling reader, and how she loved stories, I thought of my own grandson and how when he was in first grade, my daughter and my son-in-law were called up, and the school wanted to provide intervention for him because he wasn't reading, right, and writing too. And very wisely, they refused. They said they don't want him to have intervention. He'll read when he is ready to read, but he's not ready to do it now. But he loved too. He loved hearing stories. He loved it. Oh, he wanted to hear it over and over again. Stories from books and also stories that we told him. And I made me think about it, and made me think about that perhaps also reading for him at that point might have actually been boring because he liked stories. And the books that they were reading were My Mother Cooks, My Mother This, My Mother That, My Father This, My Father That. And he didn't, that he wasn't interested in that, and I don't know if somehow that was part of it, because I think that at a certain point, his teacher was very smart about things, and because she saw that he was not going anywhere with these level A and level B books, and she just skipped him over to a level C book, which was a little bit more complex than that. And he got more interested in reading at that point. And now he's 19 and he can read.
Mhm.
He's fine, you know. But I did think about that when you were when you were saying. Another thing that I just wanted to mention is that this past week, I had a conversation with a kindergarten teacher who's an absolutely wonderful teacher. I mean, a really, really wonderful teacher. And she's teaching remotely, right? And they have to follow these units of study. And so in September, they had to do this, and another study in October and November, you know, and they had to keep going with it. The children, it's almost 100% second language learners at the school. And she said she feels like it's almost abusive because the kids are like, they're just lost, you know, and she has to keep going with these studies. And the principal wants them to do an assessment at the end of each unit, and et cetera. And so this is actually like, if we are telling parents that, you know, well, we meet children where they are, but then in school, this is actually happening, you know, where this is the opposite of meeting children where they are. I wonder, as somebody who is a consultant when I am working, how do I convince the administrator, who is a smart person, but who is also getting pressure from the superintendent of his, you know, it's, you know, Matt, you were a principal, you know, all of these pressures that come. How can I convince him that this is not doing any positive service for his children? I don't know what to, you know, I need help with what to say to him and to the parents, you know, because they're starting to think that this is what it should be like. They have to push their child to, you know, to succeed. I don't know if my question was clear, but.
So, I don't know if anyone wants to go first, or I'll jump in. I think we have to always come back to, does this make sense for children, right? And so if I was a principal, or when I was a principal, right, and if I was watching a unit of study being implemented across the school and writing that wasn't being effective, right, I would very quickly, we would adjust it or change that, right? I'd have a hard time thinking that a superintendent who cares at all about children would say, no, I really think you should keep doing this thing even though it's not meeting your children's needs. I haven't run into very many superintendents like that. And so I think often what happens is that people don't know what else to do. They're handed a unit of study in a kindergarten class that's not appropriate for kindergartners at the beginning of the year, that starts off, for example, with a genre study, which I don't think is particularly appropriate for the beginning of kindergarten. But they're not sure what else to do. So I think as one of the things we'd say to that principal would be, let me give you some alternatives on how you could start the year in kindergarten, or how this unit of study could be modified to better meet students' needs. It's kind of like, you know, it's the same thing we say to teachers when, you know, teachers say they're, you know, handed a unit and supposed to follow this unit. And we say, well, what do you do when you come to a lesson that your class doesn't need? Do you go ahead and teach it anyway, or do you change it? And they say, well, no, we should change. No, I've never had a principal say, you know, I really think you should go ahead and teach this lesson that your students really don't need, right? And so it's the same thing in terms of units across a grade level or across the school, is that if something isn't working, there are ways to modify it, first of all, right? And so if we think about the reason people change, it's generally because either they're dissatisfied with how things are currently, or they have a clear vision for how things could be better. And so part of what we have to do in that case is, if there's a dissatisfaction with how things are, we're halfway there, we have to be able to show principals and teachers, here's a different way of doing something that would be more appropriate for your students and would actually accelerate learning, would meet their needs better, would help students learn, as opposed to a curriculum or a unit that's hindering students. So that would be my starting point. I think we always have to think about what's the connection between what's the belief that somebody has and what's the action that they're taking. And so we first have to say, okay, do we believe this thing is actually working? And then sometimes you're saying, yeah, it's not really working, but I don't know what else to do. So I think our responsibility is to help them see other ways that they can do it.
Mm-hmm.
At least as a starting point. That's where I'd start.
Right. Aeriale, you're teaching third grade this year, right? Are you still teaching? Are you teaching third grade this year?
Yes, I am.
Second?
No, third grade.
Third grade. But you taught kindergarten. So if you were teaching kindergarten remotely now, like, what would you do?
I think that that's an excellent question. There was the possibility that I was going to teach kindergarten this year, and I was actually relieved to loop up with I taught second grade last year, and I just looped up with my second graders to third grade. So I think the idea of teaching kindergarten online is, I don't know, it seems a bit ludicrous, to be quite frank. I think that we would have to look for opportunities for kids to utilize the environment that they have at home, the materials that they have at home, to play and to think and to somehow work together and build language, whether it's like in a breakout room or whatever, with interactions with other kids. I mean, you have to maximize those opportunities for kids to kind of work together. I think lots of singing, lots of reading aloud, lots of dancing and movement, and those sorts of things. I think, there are some things that we do at school. They don't translate perfectly, but I think that they can translate to the online environment. And I think, I would lean very heavily on those sorts of things, lean very heavily in the direction of play and engagement, and less in the direction of this like very direct, explicit instruction, with a whole group. That's the other thing, right? So with kindergartners, if you're sending them on, first of all, I just think it's horrifying just thinking about that being kids' introduction to school. This is such a terrible year for kids to begin, school. So I just had to get that out there. But we do a lot of like teaching, right, of school behaviors and those sorts of things. And like the thought of like sending kindergartners off to breakout rooms in August, that sounds really scary. Like what is going to happen over there? And while I'm over here, the thing about breakout rooms is that you can only see one breakout room at a time, and so you're not able to kind of see all of the things that are happening and going on. So anyway, I think I think like focusing initially, and I know like on those sorts of things. And then the other thing is like the amount of time is so concerning to me. So our school district actually started out, we're completely synchronous. So with third graders, I have them from 8:15 until 1:50 synchronous every day. And the kindergartners had a very similar schedule. Like it was just a little bit shorter, I think 20 or 30 minutes. And the kindergarten teacher said, this just can't be, right? Like this synchronous instruction for this amount of time is just not appropriate. It's developmentally inappropriate. And so they did shorten the day even more for our transitional kindergarten and then our kindergarten students. And I know that that's made a huge difference. I have one little girl in my class who has a brother in kindergarten, and they're kind of right next to each other doing their synchronous instruction. And so I can hear, right, like what's going on over there. It is loud. It is like crazy. And I just think like, oh my gosh, poor woman, trying to manage, because we can have up to 30 kids. So poor woman trying to manage that many kindergartners at one time in an online setting. I just, I don't mean to be like Debbie Downer about it. Like, I'm sure I would have figured out a lot of things to do the same way that I figured out in second and third grade. Things that I thought weren't possible have become possible. But it sure is just not developmentally appropriate. And so it just makes it like the younger you get, it just gets harder and harder, I think.
Which is why then I think in those situations we have to go back to those foundational types of things that are what make a writing experience in kindergarten valuable anyway in normal times, are even more important now. And so, for example, we launched, well, in a kindergarten class, right, we start making books right at the beginning of the year because that's the type of writing they know. We read lots of books, and so we start making books. We don't care what type of books they are. We don't care what they're about. We don't care what genre. We just start making books. It's a very playful, right, very appropriate way of starting a year. And we did the same thing online this year, right? Launched bookmaking on the third day of a kindergarten class, right? And it was just, all right, you've got a book there. Let me show you what I mean by making a book. Have at it. We taught very little. It's just, and what the key to that is okay, what's if there's not any expectations, I don't expect you to do any certain thing. It's just, all right, let's see what you do, and then we can figure out where to start to go from there. But let's do this in the most fun, enjoyable, low stress way possible. And here's an empty book, put some stuff in it, is a pretty low-key way of starting, which is exactly how we would start in person, just doing the same thing online, right? I mean, Kathy, I'd think of the same thing from a reading standpoint, right? It's just, all right, let's look at some books, right? Let's hear, it's a little tricky. It's easier for me to send books home, to write in, to have materials there. I think it's a bigger challenge online with having books at home. But at the same time, it's not that there are any prerequisites or you have to be able to do anything, right? To be able to start, if you look at what makes reading most joyful and enjoyable in a kindergarten class at any point in the year, that's what we'd have to rely on heavily online, right?
I agree with you, but the expectations haven't disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
They haven't gone away. And that's where the struggle is for teachers, I think. Sometimes something feels right, and it seems it's research-based and it's the right thing to do with kids. But the expectation, that is placed on you and that you're supposed to be placing on children, like, it stifles you, quite frankly. It gets in the way of you doing your best work. I mean, thankfully for me, I don't care. But I just don't like. I mean, I'm not saying I don't care. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah,
I'm a rule breaker, and if you're going to fire me for doing what's right for children, then go ahead. Like that, and I mean, 23 years in, I can say that. I know that I can find another job tomorrow, and it's not going to be a problem. And I know that's not easy for other people to say, and I acknowledge that I have that privilege. But it's hard to get teachers to be responsive to children and the needs that they have in that moment, or, not even necessarily needs, just like, this is the next place to go, or this is what they enjoy, or, any type of responsiveness to children is really difficult for teachers who are beholden to the expectations that are being placed on them.
I just had a Zoom call with a teacher yesterday who next week is assessment week. He's meeting with all his kindergartners next week to assess them and to show growth he has to show evidence of growth from September to December. And well, he has some, but it's also not it's kind of out in different lanes than typical how he would be able to show growth if they were in the classroom every day with each other. And he's just thinking about how does he talk about that, or how does he make powers see this growth is valuable and worth it, and it might not be the same growth in growth in different domains. And just when Matt and I were working on I Am Reading, the premise of that book is that our fake title is I Am Reading, damn it, because their kids are doing so much as readers before they're reading the word, so much comprehension work, so much fluency work. They're developing habits and behaviors and preferences and identities and independence and agency with books before they're able to decode. And so, I mean, I was working in a classroom with 3-year-olds, and there was a picture book where a dad was cooking, and one of the kids said, "That dads don't do that. That's a critical read of a book." So, Vicki, one of the things you have said, I've I've repeated this in every workshop, giving you credit, and I'm going to make a little tattoo of this quote, Vicki Vinton quote. But Vicki, you said once in a workshop that the goal is to support kids in thinking with complexity and meaning in anything they're reading, you know, whatever the text is. And we see so much evidence that 3 and 4 and 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds have so much deep thinking and so much to talk about when they're reading. So one of the things that, if we're thinking about in a remote platform, when we have kids online, what might we be able to nudge and nurture? And certainly talking about books, thinking deeply about books with each other, and having big ideas even about little books. But anyway, the one thing that I was getting at is this these fake things that we think of as so real and immovable. So when Matt and I were working on I Am Reading, we looked, when I first started teaching first grade, and probably when Matt taught, and Renee, when you and I were colleagues at PS 321, the year-end grade level expectation for a kindergarten reader was to be able to read level B books, which would be books, highly patterned books with picture support, with, you know, I love my mom, I love my dad, you know, whatever, easy pattern. And now in many places, the year-end expectation is D, but then you go into schools that really, it might be D on paper, but teachers are really nudged, or not nudged, it's not a gentle nudge, pushed to get kids up to level F by the end of kindergarten to account for summer reading loss, and to kind of sweeten the deal for first grade teachers. Well, then what ends up happening is first grade teachers are going to have this expectation that kids will come up to them at this level. So then first grade teachers start to get worried. Well, they're not ready. They're not. So we end up inadvertently perpetuating these narratives about kids. Mm-hmm. But nothing really changed there. I always say in workshops, kids' brains didn't change in 10 years. That there wasn't some evolutionary biological change. It was an adult imposition that, oh, we better adjust the levels because now we have, the standards came into play and there's a history there. But and it's so hard, like Vicki said, we're so competitive and we're so worried, and we're constantly looking left to right to see what other places and other schools and other kids are doing. And as parents, as teachers, but we don't have to buy into it. And, you know, Aeriale is somebody who, you know, is just stakes her ground. Kids first, kids before curriculum, kids before assessment. She teaches kids, not a curriculum. And I know you've done some shenanigans in your years about like averting, you know, unrealistic or unchildlike expectations, or whatever, you know what I mean.
Well, you know, my first kindergarten class that I taught was in 1968. Okay. And it was a half-day kindergarten. You know, I had 2 classes. I had a morning class and an afternoon class. I have completely no memory of doing, I mean, I don't have my plans or any of those books from then, but I don't have any memory of doing any like reading instruction or writing instruction then. I just don't. I read a lot of stories. I love to read stories with kids, and you know, I read a lot of stories, and actually I didn't know that people didn't do it, and so I started reading chapter books, you know, and they loved it, you know, and I did that. But
that's reading instruction.
Yes, I know. I understand that.
But
I mean, if
I know you know that. I just want to make sure anyone watching this. I mean, that's reading. Even though you just said they're not doing reading instruction, that's reading instruction.
But I mean, I wasn't doing like a reading workshop and a writing workshop, and you know, etc. You know, so that's what I did then. All right, and actually, I've had children of those children in my class since then. You know, and I keep in touch with a lot of those kids who are, I mean, they're like, I think they may be in their 60s now or something, or some crazy, you know, something crazy. But I mean, they're professionals. They're also plumbers. They're, you know, they're electricians. They're one is teaching Arabic languages in Israel. Or, you know, they're doing all sorts of different things. You know, I mean, they did okay. You know, they did fine. You know, so that's that same thing. Like they're children. They were children then, and this children now might possibly have the children who are coming into my, now I haven't had my own class since 2000, but the children who are coming into my class then, I would say they had more of like a pseudo sophistication than the children that I might have had, you know, in 1968. But it was pseudo sophistication. They're just children. They're still just children, you know. Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it was so good listening to you, to all of you, because it made me feel better, made me feel much more hopeful. And I just wanted to tell you that one of the schools that I'm working with, the kindergarten teachers at my encouragement, put up donors choose, you know, where you can write up a proposal, and, you know, it was just funded to get binoculars for all of the children in the kindergarten. Binocular, because these children, a lot of them are just stuck in apartments. You know, they're not, you know, they're not really getting it. They don't have backyards. They don't have, you know, they're in apartments, and some of them like more than one family in an apartment. But you can always look out the window at things and all that. And I thought this would really maybe be like a provocation towards writing and towards maybe thinking about things like, oh, you're seeing birds, you know, maybe we should try to find some things about birds on the internet and some books about birds, or I don't know. It'll be curious to see. They didn't get the binoculars yet. It was just funded, to see if something takes off from that, you know. But that sort of feeds into my, you know, my push for inquiry and investigation and play, you know. But I think I hope that a lot of parents and teachers listen to this, and administrators. I'm going to send it out because I want them to hear what you said, because it was just so so down to earth, and it just spoke to like what's really important for children, what's really super important. And I really appreciate so much what all of you have. I was going to read something at the end, but I feel like there's no real reason for me to do it. But I will tell you, it was actually, Matt, you'll know this maybe from the book, because I'm going to go back to being a grandmother and talk about my grandson again. And so he was, as I said, a rather shy little boy, but always seemed to be thinking of things. But his teachers complained that he didn't raise his hand enough, you know, he didn't speak out enough, etc. He's now an actor, right? And which kind of surprised us when he discovered this passion, you know, because he gets up on the stage and he can be someone else, you know. And he discovered this in middle school, all right, when he was in middle school, and they had a drama department, and he was in that group of children who went through the drama part. And so when he was going into high school, he had to write an essay to apply for LaGuardia High School, where he wanted to go, which is a school of the arts. And he wrote this essay, and it was in the book, I think I have it here somewhere, The Teacher You Want to Be. I do have it somewhere. Here it is. The Teacher You Want to Be. And I say Matt because Matt, you were very involved, and Kathy, you were also very involved with this. But, so I pulled out a little part of it because I think this really speaks to how when children have a passion for something, just like adults, when we have a passion for something, how it everything that you do becomes more meaningful, all right? And reading and writing will become more meaningful. So I just pulled the little bits. I took one is from the beginning and then from the end of his essay, all right? And he wrote, "We all find our voice as we grow older, but we all do it in different ways. I spent most of my time daydreaming as a young child because I felt as though none of the work I was doing mattered. All the strict rules my teachers gave me about writing didn't allow me to find my passion. They made me fall into the cracks, leaving me to think that it was impossible to have, let alone show, my voice. Even if I wanted to, I was given no room to experiment. Acting gave me the confidence to make my own writing style and stick out, stepping out of the normal. I daydreamed when I was younger because I found much of what I did every day boring and imagined what it would be like to be someone else. Now I don't have to daydream. I just walk into the black box theater in my school. I was rereading that today, and I was just thinking about how he's really lucky that he discovered something like that, and through that, and now he was not a reader. He was not really a big reader. I mean, he could read, and he did well on his reading tests and all that, but he didn't really read. But now that he's acting, he's reading every play he can get his hands on. He reads plays all the time, and he reads about acting and about plays, and he reads what he has a passion for, and he's keeping a journal and he's writing. So I think, why can't we want that for all of our children? He was lucky that he found that. And I hope that all of our kids find something like that. And they're lucky because they have you guiding them towards that. I want to thank you very much.